This presentation is narrated and produced by Bethany Goldsmith, a student of Salisbury University. I chose to do my presentation on Whitney Young Jr., who was a civil rights activist. Young was born on July 31st, 1921, in Lincoln Ridge, Kentucky. He was a middle child with two sisters. His mother, Laura Young, was a teacher who was publicly recognized by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and his father, Whitney Sr., was the principal of the Lincoln Institute, an African-American preparatory school. His father was also the president of the Kentucky Negro Educational Association. Young earned his Bachelor's of Science in Social Work from Kentucky State University, a historically Black institution. Young had aspirations of becoming a doctor early on while attending Kentucky State. During this time at Kentucky State, Young was also a forward on the university's basketball team and was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, where he served as the vice president. He became the president of his senior class and graduated in 1941. In 1947, he earned a master's degree in social work from the University of Minnesota. During World War II, Young was trained in electrical engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was then assigned to a road construction crew of Black soldiers supervised by Southern white officers. After just 3 weeks, he was promoted from private to first sergeant, creating hostility on both sides. Despite the tension, Young was able to mediate effectively between his white officers and Black soldiers that were angry with their poor treatment. This situation propelled Young into a career in race relations. Young wed his college sweetheart, Margaret Buckner, who was an American educator and author, in a small ceremony in 1944. The couple went on to have 2 children together. After Young earned his master's in social work, he went on to work for a few years with the Urban League of St. Paul. The organization began making strides in placing African Americans in previously white-only employee positions. He became executive secretary of the League of Omaha's branch in 1950 and thus was at the forefront of racial integration in the region. Young was appointed executive director of the National Urban League in 1961. Young gained support from prominent white businessmen, and he was instrumental in saving the league from financial ruin as well as handling major overhauls of the organization's structure and ultimately increasing its budget and staff size. At age 40, in 1961, Young became president of the National League, and he revitalized the relatively passive civil rights organization and turned it into an aggressive fighter for civil rights and justice. He expanded the organization from 38 employees to 1,600 employees, and from an annual budget of $325,000 to more than $6.1 million. Around the time of Young's involvement with the League, he also took a position as Dean of Atlanta University's School of Social Work in the mid-50s, remaining actively involved in the civil rights movement and heading the state branch of the NAACP. Young had access to the U.S. presidential office and was a close advisor to Lyndon B. Johnson. Young became known for his domestic Marshall Plan. Young's plan sought to eradicate ghettos and to increase spending on education, housing, vocational training, and health services at a cost of $145 billion over 10 years, which was thought to have helped shape the president's policies, and also, in turn, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1968 for his work. After visiting troops in the Vietnam War, which he eventually publicly opposed, Young established a Veterans Affairs Department for the League. Young spearheaded drives for equal opportunity for African Americans in U.S. industry and government services, including the armed forces. He helped place African American workers into jobs previously reserved for whites. He fought for better treatment of African Americans in the armed forces and jobs for military veterans. He was also an author. He wrote To Be Equal in 1964 and Beyond Racism, Building an Open Society, 1969, as well as a popular newspaper column. In both novels, he strips away the myths and understandings that cloud our view of America's racial problems and provides an action program that could enable Americans to move beyond racism to an open society of justice and equality. He explains what government and the private society must do to solve the racial crisis and shows how every individual can play an important role in building an open society. The success and ease Young had in working with the white establishment made him a target of harsh, sometimes bitter criticisms. Black militants and white radicals labeled him as a sellout to whites or as an Uncle Tom, Whitey, Oreo, and other derogatory names, according to Urban League president Hugh B. Price. Love said, "People call her brother unkind names because they don't understand his modus operatum. He wasn't out there cursing the white man," she said. He was telling white men and women what they had done wrong and how they could change it and help African Americans instead of always putting them down. He may not have been a marcher, but he was a negotiator, Young's sister stated. Love said her brother's efforts are perhaps not as recognized as other civil rights leaders because he wasn't out in the streets, screaming, hollering, and marching. Young himself once wrote, "You can holler, protest, march, picket, and demonstrate, but somebody must be able to sit in on the strategy conferences and plot a course. There must be strategies. The researchers, the professionals to carry out the program, that's our role." Consequently, Love said, many people didn't know about all the good things he was doing behind closed doors. Young died on March 11, 1971, at the age of 49, while attending a conference in Lagos, Nigeria. He is believed to have drowned while swimming at a beach. There was some initial conflict about the cause of death, with the Nigerian's coroner's office stating Young had suffered a brain hemorrhage. Young helped thousands of people struggling against discrimination by taking the fight directly to those in power. However, because those in power were the same white elite that he shook hands with, made deals, and worked with behind the scenes, he was also one of the most controversial figures in the civil rights movement. But Young's work was instrumental in breaking down the barriers of segregation and equality that held Black African Americans down. Many sites across the country are named after Young or have memorials dedicated to him. For instance, in 1973, the East Capitol Street Bridge in Washington, D.C., that you see in this slide, was renamed the Whitey Young Memorial Bridge in his honor. Young's birthplace in Shelby County, Kentucky, is a designated National Historic Landmark with a museum dedicated to Young's life and achievements. Young was honored in 1981 by the United States Postal Service on a postage stamp issued as part of its ongoing Black Heritage series. The Whitney Young School of Honors and Liberal Studies at Kentucky State University was named after him. Also, Clark Atlanta University named its School of Social Work, where Whitney Young served as dean in Young's honor. And finally, the Boy Scouts of America created the Whitney M. Young Jr. Service Award to recognize outstanding services by an adult, individual, or an organization for demonstrating involvement in the development and implementation of scouting opportunities for youth from rural or low-income urban backgrounds. Schools named after Young include Whitney M. Young High School in Chicago, as shown on this slide, as well as the Whitney M. Young Gifted and Talented Leadership Academy in Cleveland, Ohio, and Whitney M. Young Elementary in Dallas, Texas. Nancy J. Weiss in her 1989 book, said, Whitney M. Young Jr. in the struggle for civil rights wrote that most of his adult life in the white world was transcending barriers of race, wealth, and social standings to advance the welfare of Black Americans. His goal was to gain access for Blacks to good jobs, education, housing, health care, and social services. His tactics were reason and negotiation. In conclusion, I believe Mr. Young summed up his life quite perfectly when he said, I am not anxious to be the loudest or the most popular, but I would like to think at a crucial moment I was an effective voice of the voiceless, an effective hope of the hopeless. I must say he did not receive the recognition he deserved, but he certainly gave hope and created change for people of color.